I'm sorry, your question cut out there, but essentially, are you asking if RVs are counted as a type of housing?
Yes.
Yeah, no. So the statutes that kind of govern this whole thing, they specify what's called needed housing, and that includes certain housing types. Middle housing is one of them. Single family detached dwellings are one of them. Multifamily detached dwellings, or multifamily units are also considered on there. It does not include recreational vehicles, right? Which is, maybe an option that could be useful for somebody who needs like a temporary housing option that's very cheap, but not really the same as permanent housing, if that makes sense. Does that get at your
They are
question?
now, well, they are now permanent housing according to the state.
They are
The
not. Actually, state law does not consider RVs permanent housing.
Senate Bill 1013 did not change that.
Nope.
Okay,
I
thank
believe what Senate Bill 1013 did, and this is the county RV siting bill, is that correct?
you. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. What that does is that enables counties, if they choose to enable certain properties, I believe rural residential properties, to be able to cite an RV on that under certain parameters, like there's certain criteria it has to meet. And what that means is that a county, if their kind of local political body decides that they want to pursue this, they can allow a property owner, in addition, maybe if they have a single family home on their current, rural residential property, that they could cite an RV to be used as a residential dwelling. It doesn't require anybody to do anything. It doesn't require RVs to be considered a type of permanent housing, and it actually does not intersect with this process. RVs are not a form of needed housing.
Thank you. Thank you
Mhm.
very much.
Yeah, Carrie.
I'm not really sure how to phrase this question, so I might be all over the place. So I'm asking for forgiveness before I even start.
No worries.
The pictures, graphics that you provided in the previous slide, where you're replicating, the cartoon graphics of housing here, there, and that's being replicated. I think as a, this is a suggestion to DLCD, as an educational tool, we might want to look at using something different than just the Lego houses going in. And the reason I say that is because kind of in conjunction to the middle housing discussion that Murph just mentioned, some of the development that's happening in the East County area is all middle housings. There are property developments, 40-acre development coming in with, well, not even 40, 10-acre development coming in with 100 lots that as soon as it gets developed, they turn in a 200 lot subdivision. And so what we're ending up with is these very standard design of houses just being replicated one after another. And it looks very much like your cartoon graphics that you showed.
Yeah,
and I'm just suggesting that maybe we start thinking a little bit more creatively, if for nothing else, to show that to people that it doesn't have to look, the subdivisions don't have to and shouldn't look like exactly like same as all the other houses that are going in.
totally understand. Yeah.
Because one of the things that I wrote down is you're looking for encouraging diversity of housing. What's happening right now in the name of increasing housing is not the diversity that we need. It's just replication of same thing that people can build for the cheapest amount as fast as they can so that they can get it on the market. And frankly, it's ugly. I don't think it's sustainable. I think those areas are going to become slums sooner than later. And I think we really, if we're truly looking at diversity, we need to be looking at how do we make subdivisions livable rather than just affordable. Because honestly, we talk about affordability. People can afford $500,000 houses. That is not affordable by any means, but that's what's being built. So I would encourage DLCD to really think creatively and how you communicate with your general audience at large, even if it's just tiny little thing as graphics. Think a little bit more beautiful, think a little bit more creatively, think something other than just putting, if you have 10 acres, you can put 100 houses that look exactly the same in the same size, just facing mirror to each other, right next to each other, 5 foot away from each other. It's so close the offset that we see in these housing are so close that you can't even put a ladder to get up to the top. You have to literally build a small scaffolding to get to the top of the rain gutters to fix these. And I just think that we're doing our citizens disservice by not, you know, number and the speed is not what we should be going after. Quality of life is a long-term, like you said, once the land gets developed, it's not going to go back to farming or forestry. We need to make sure that the land that gets developed is going to be everlasting for a very long time. And these houses that are coming in just off of Dundee Highway, Dundee bypass on the west side, those skinny houses that are just a little bit wider than the single family lot garage, single car garage width, that goes up 3 stories tall, just one after another. They just look travesty. I cannot tell you how disappointed I am every time I see developments like that going. So I'm just, there is no question or suggestion other than, you know, I would really encourage the LCD to start thinking about more than just numbers, but the quality of development that we're expecting from our partners development community.
No, totally understand. And I should mention, a lot of these graphics that I'm using, I actually developed these, and I'm not a very good artist. So the simplicity of the graphics there is actually not a consequence of an artistic decision, but because I'm not a very good artist. So I apologize
I'm
about
pretty
that.
sure that State of Oregon has lots of graphic artists that you can get
We don't
assistance from.
actually. It's just me. Sorry. But I totally take your point. I think a big part about this push is really about planning for choices for folks, right? Meaningful choices, right? It's not a choice if you have, a large subdivision where every individual house costs $700,000 and you can't really afford to live in that community. It's also not a choice too when you're, maybe forced to live in an area that doesn't have access to good schools or good, transportation or access to businesses or community. And so a big part of this is really about planning for that idea of choice, right? And thinking about, at the local level, how do we structure our communities to plan for an abundance of housing options that really do provide people meaningful choices? And so that's a big part of this push. It's a big part of this effort. Part of that includes production, right? We do have to build units. But part of that also includes making sure that we're setting up the environment in a way that we achieve the outcomes and provide meaningful choices for folks. So totally understand and totally get that. I apologize. My art choices cannot reflect that. I am sorry about that. So duly noted, and it's something that we will continue to work on. But yeah, but let's continue on, just so that way we can kind of work through this. There's going to be a lot of slides, so I know we did take some time for questions there. I'm probably not going to have time for that many questions and to be able to work all the way through this. So we kind of need to make some decisions. Do we focus on questions or do we focus on slides? I'm good to pivot to either. I just be mindful of that as we kind of continue going through. But anyways, diving back into this, I mentioned that OEA is they have this responsibility to do the math. That makes sense. They do a lot of math for a lot of different things, including obviously revenue forecasting. There are a bunch of economists, right? But then OHCS has this broader responsibility to pay attention to those tracking outcomes, right? How many units are we building? What types of units are we building? What affordabilities of units are we building, right? And essentially what their job is to kind of get all that information and to track it via a housing production dashboard, right? So that way we're not just, planning for need or estimating the amount of need, but we're also tracking outcomes over time as well, right? Okay. So I'm going to move over to talking about DLCD's responsibility, our agency. And ours is all about, I mentioned that implementation of Goal 10, the housing capacity analysis and housing production strategy. Essentially what our role is that we have direction from the legislature to kind of go through a pretty substantial administrative rulemaking process. Rules could be thought of as like, if the legislature sets the big picture, rules kind of set out the technical nerdy details, right, about like how precisely you do X, Y, and Z. And essentially the whole push of what the legislature has directed us to do is to adopt rules that really reorient Goal 10 towards achieving production, affordability, and choice. There's a lot of different kind of components that go into that. I think for the sake of time, I'm not going to talk in depth or exhaustively about all of them, but you can kind of break down this work into 3 major categories of stuff that we're doing. One of those is all about that kind of needs and production side. What are the housing types that we're planning for? What do we want our communities to look like? How are we planning for the needs of a lot of different of our community members, such as like people with disabilities, right? Or seniors, or people, like all these people in different categories of and have different unique needs, kind of that type of thing. And then of course, what actions are we going to take to facilitate the outcomes that we want to see in our community, right? Are we planning for those, kind of community amenities, ensuring that we're building these kind of communities that we want to see and that provide people meaningful choices, all that type of stuff. So that's one bucket. Another bucket's on that capacity and urbanization side of it. So we talked about the urban growth boundary. A big part of this is ensuring, right, we want to make sure that we're planning for capacity within our UGBs, but we also want to make sure that when we have the need for it, that we can make sure that we have sufficient land to accommodate need over time. We don't want that process to be super encumbering. So part of this process is really about thinking about that capacity and urbanization side of it. So to make sure that we have sufficient land to kind of support and accommodate development as well, and making sure that infrastructure is there to serve those developments. And then this last bucket is something that's called the Housing Acceleration Program. You'll remember that I mentioned that we kind of talked about tracking outcomes over time. This is a new provision that is really about kind of intervening when we're not meeting our goals. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. Essentially what this process is, I won't dive into all the details about like what the statute is or what the statute says, but essentially the way you can think about it is it's as a process that DLCD has kind of been tasked with conducting by the legislature, and we're kind of in the process of writing rules for it. And essentially what it says is, all right, DLCD, OHCS, they're going to develop this housing production dashboard, and they're going to track outcomes over time. And your job, DLCD, is, we recognize that we're setting these ambitious production targets. We want to see housing production affordability and choice in our communities, but we also know that this is ambitious, right? Local governments, they're going to be trying their best to facilitate housing production affordability and choice, but there's a lot of things that are outside of their control. There are a lot of barriers that exist, some that might be stateside, some that might be, regional, some that might be driven by the market. And your job is essentially, all right, when we're not hitting our goals, the objective here is not necessarily to punish a city, it's to look at what barriers are happening. What are the different kind of market barriers, the different local barriers, regional barriers, state barriers that could be inhibiting us achieving our goals? And your job is to look into that, do an audit essentially, where you kind of see that we're not meeting our goals, and to identify actions that are within our control to take, both a state side and local side, to actually address those barriers over time. I could talk more about that, but yeah, no, I see we have a hand up right now. Tom, please.
Yeah, thanks for your time and efforts tonight. I really appreciate it. I want to say that up front. As far as the methodology goes, I get, the estimating total needs over a 20-year period for housing growth and projected population growth, but I'm more interested in the methodology about the homelessness and houselessness, because I don't believe there really is one. And so I kind of tried to drill down into this before our meeting tonight. And it says the methodology is going to be run by, like you said, the OEA inside the Department of Administrative Services. But when you go click on their methodology, you literally get page not found. And I don't know of any method, and we never discovered one in our discussion about affordable housing relative to a zoning development ordinance that we considered a few months ago, wherein we actually had a hard, good number on houselessness, homelessness in our communities. So I'm interested in the methodology you guys are employing to get to that number.
Yeah, well, first, let me start by finding the interim methodology report. Let's make sure that you guys are able to access it. And let me post that in the chat right here for you. That link should work. So
cool.
Yeah, that methodology that you see, this was just posted by DAS. This is actually the most updated version. It's an interim methodology, kind of with the expectation that it's like open for public comment, that type of thing, and going to be refined in the future. But it talks through the individual components that go into estimating need, and each one of them derived from different data sources, right? So if we think about population growth, right, these are, how our communities are anticipated to grow over time. This is information that's largely drawn from the data provided by the US Census Bureau, right? So the US Census Bureau, right, obviously a huge source of data in the United States. They provide us a lot of information about that type of thing. The same could be said of things like second and vacation homes. And the report goes into a lot of the kind of nitty-gritty methodological details about like how they estimate that, maybe what some of the caveats are, because no data source is perfect, certainly not the US Census Bureau, right? So kind of noting those different caveats, but also providing the rationale of like, hey, this is the best way that we have with the information that we have to kind of estimate this dimension of need. And homelessness is particularly tricky because homelessness does not have a single unified data source. It actually has a series of different data sources. The best that we have available to us right now include one thing called the point in time count. This is a count that I believe is conducted once every 2 years, and essentially is literally a volunteers that kind of go out into communities and kind of individually count people who are either in shelters or experiencing unsheltered homelessness at one date out of the year. So that's one dimension. So that's one component of that. Obviously, that misses a lot of people when you just go out and count everybody, right? So the other dimension of this is kind of an indirect data source called the McKinney-Vento data. And what this captures is students who are experiencing homelessness, right? So what the methodology does is it kind of combines these two data sources. There might be some other details that I'm kind of glossing over because I'm not the technical expert on the methodology here, but they use that to get at an estimate of the number of people experiencing homelessness, right? So that's kind of incorporated into this because these folks would be missed by the census. They are essentially not counted by the census, right? So it's a need that's kind of part of there, but not really captured by any existing data sources. So the intent here is to capture it. Does that help get at your question?
Yes, thank you. I mean, it is a very dynamic and difficult number, and that's the point.
Totally.
And in our discussions, we struggled with coming up with any kind of measurement that had any meaning to our decision making. And so I'm very interested in how you guys are coming across that, because that number determines a lot of decision making down the road. So, but thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Great.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, and I should mention, homelessness and estimating homelessness, it is very fraught, right? There's all the data sources that we have, they're imperfect, right? And so there's a lot of literature about like, all right, well, in light of the imperfection, we need information to be able to make decisions from. So what's the best that we can develop, right? So that's kind of what this methodology is trying to do. This exists in other places too. Most cities that do this analysis at the local level also try to kind of get at this with those same data sources too. So yeah, just to kind of point that out. But yeah, Michael, please. Oh, you're on mute.
Michael, you're muted.
Item number 10, responding proportionately to housing under production. What does that mean?
Yeah, the basic idea is that you have communities of different sizes and different capacities, right? So you have some communities, obviously City of Portland, they have very large staff, they have a large population, right? And they have a lot of resources available to them. So the basic idea is like, all right, well, a city like Portland can probably do a lot, but a city that's like very small, maybe they have like 10,000 folks and one planner on staff, they don't have a lot of resources available to them. Their ability to do things is much less than, say, a larger city. So the basic idea behind responding proportionately is that we're thinking and being considerate to, well, what's the need, but also what is the capacity of a jurisdiction to do something about that, right? So thinking about that proportionality is kind of a part of this overall statute. I should mention, these are all principles established by the legislature. This is like, hey, if the legislature, they have this vision for how they want this program to work, and these are the things that we want it to achieve, just broadly and generally. They go into a lot more detail in the statute about how it functions. Again, for the sake of time, I'm kind of not diving into the details.
Isn't housing production based upon the construction industry?
Yeah.
The ones that determine whether or not they want to build in some place?
Yeah. So the intent here too is also to recognize that local governments, well, they have some levers at their control, right? Like you guys decide whether or not a project is allowed, for example, as planning commission, right? Based on the standards that you guys adopt. You have staff that determine like, all right, well, what are the zones? What are the different housing types that we're going to allow in our communities? And what are the regulations that guide their development? How do we charge for things like public facilities and ensure that we have infrastructure to support these places? So the basic idea here is like, yeah, some of this is the market, But the point of the program is when we're not hitting our goals, let's look at what the barriers are. Let's identify, hey, maybe there are some of these market barriers where the construction industry is really not developing housing, that type of thing. But let's look at the barriers that exist kind of within our control at the state level and at the local level to address barriers. That's kind of the idea behind that. It's
And
pretty much, yeah.
Item number E there on it says escalating enforcement. What are you talking about there for escalating? What type of enforcement do you have?
Yeah, so, and again, I don't talk about this in the it talks about it more in the details of the statute, but the basic idea is that when there are barriers to housing that state and local governments have control over, we should take actions within our control to address barriers. And essentially what they're saying here is, hey, DLCD, you also have this charge to, you have kind of this program that you have to administer. Sometimes there are going to be instances where folks maybe don't want to play ball in terms of like taking actions to address need. And you have these tools that are intended to help address that. You use those sparingly, right? Like these enforcement tools, these are things you're going to rarely use, but you're expected, we, the legislature, have directed you in response to kind of not taking actions within our control to utilize kind of escalating enforcement, really ultimately to encourage, state and local governments to take action to address need, but kind of providing this backstop to say, hey, also, and we're serious, So that's really kind of the intent behind there. I could talk more about the specifics of that, but it starts to get a little bit technical.
Okay. And on this homeless thing, I've been watching the news, and a lot of the folks that are, coming on the news there with the homeless, those people have opportunities to go into
Michael, you went back on mute.
I think that was my fault, but not on purpose.
Okay, my question about this homeless thing is, I've seen the news, and a lot of folks don't want to even go into shelters. They don't want housing. They want to live on the street. And yet you're including those people, it seems like, in your statistics for what you're doing. I don't think that's appropriate.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I should mention, the Department of Administrative Services, they were directed by the legislature to include an estimate for people experiencing homelessness and to incorporate it in this methodology. I should mention this whole process, this is not about fixing homelessness. None of this is a policy response about fixing homelessness, but it's recognizing that if somebody does not have a home, their housing need is not being met, right? So we should plan for that. And so that's the essential basic idea behind this. That's in the legislation that the legislature passed, right? So if that's kind of a policy disagreement you have, my suggestion is to write to your legislator, right? Because those are the folks who made that determination, that distinction.
So
Yeah,
Sean,
Jennifer.
I'm Jennifer Hughes. I'm the planning director. And I guess I would, first of all, it's clear that the Planning Commission is very interested and you're being very patient and thorough in your answers. But I do want to acknowledge that, you're giving us your time tonight. And I think I would like to ask the commission to please hold their questions until the end and to recognize that Sean is not the person who drafted this policy. He's here to explain to us how it works. And so please continue, because I do want them to be able to hear the full presentation, and then staff will be capable of responding to additional questions if we run out of time. So
totally understand. No, thank you. I appreciate it. All right, so let's continue on. So I mentioned, right, we kind of, it took a little bit, but we got through it. That's essentially like the high levels of what all is in that policy, essentially that bill that was passed in 2023. Now we're going to talk about the metro region, specifically kind of some of the changing responsibilities that are going to be happening in the metro region in response to this policy that get a little bit more specific and get a little bit more into the weeds about like, how does this intersect with Clackamas County and of course other jurisdictions in the metro, right? So I'll start by saying, talking about a bill that was passed in the 2024 session. So 1 year later after the adoption of House Bill 2001. And this was essentially in recognition that in the metro region, kind of unlike other areas where oftentimes, urban development really happens in cities and then counties are mostly rural, in metro, it's a little bit different where you have not only a lot of cities in the metro region, each with their own kind of responsibilities, but you also have these relatively large areas that kind of look, walk, and talk like cities. Places like, Jennings Lodge or Oaks Grove, or, you know, a lot of those different kind of communities that exist that are urban, but they're unincorporated. They're not incorporated into a city, right? And these places have housing needs. And in fact, they're quite large. In fact, like I believe the statistic is like, if you took Washington County's population in their urban unincorporated area, it would be like the third biggest city in Oregon, something like that. And so kind of in recognition of these, you know, large population centers that kind of historically had not really planned for housing in the past, the legislature decided, hey, we want to make sure that we're planning for housing in these areas because these areas are pretty big in the metro. And that includes, you know, all of these areas that are defined as urban unincorporated lands. And they actually provided a definition in statute. Essentially, these 5 bullet points are kind of what define urban unincorporated lands. I won't go into maybe the technical details, but the best way to think about it would be like those communities like Jennings Lodge or Oaks Grove, places that are not part of a city, but really kind of function like a city. They have kind of similar levels of development. They tend to have, you know, like urban services like water and sewer, you know, things like that. They're not rural lands, and they kind of look a little bit more like cities, but as kind of a quirk of jurisdiction, they're not incorporated. And essentially, basically what this policy kind of articulates is that these areas, right, you know, they, under this kind of ONA policy, they will kind of receive an allocation similar to cities for those areas, right, for those urban unincorporated areas, and that they're going to kind of plan for these areas similar to how cities plan for housing within their communities, right? So it's saying, all right, we have these Goal 10 responsibilities. These have kind of historically applied to all local governments in Oregon, but, you know, largely have been implemented by cities. But for these areas in the metro urban unincorporated areas, we want to plan for housing under Goal 10. So those kind of different components that I mentioned previously on the, you know, housing capacity analysis, the housing production strategy, all the components of Goal 10, these are kind of applied to metro counties, at least as they relate to urban unincorporated lands. And essentially what it also specifies is that kind of default planning responsibility falls to counties. So in the case of an urban unincorporated land, that would be Clackamas County for places like Jennings Lodge or Oaks Grove. But these counties can also enter into agreements that they often have with either, you know, other governments, say, for example, cities for different areas, that type of thing. It gives them the ability to delegate responsibilities, right? So if there's an area that maybe, I don't know, the city of Milwaukee administers, this enables Clackamas County to enter into intergovernmental agreements with them, right? So essentially what it says is, hey, we want to plan for these areas, so we're going to start doing it. And that's kind of the main premise of this policy. And what that means is that Clackamas County is kind of going to be part of that. You know, they're going to be developing these plans, these housing capacity analyses and production strategies on a regular kind of schedule, similar to other cities inside of the metro, and kind of plan for housing needs. So that's one part to keep in mind. The other part to keep in mind is in the metro region, housing need is a little bit special because we have metro regional government. And Metro's job, kind of largely, is planning for the overall growth of the metro region, specifically the kind of metro urban growth boundary. Metro has this responsibility to generally kind of plan for housing growth in that context. So what the policy specifies is that Metro is going to retain that responsibility. They still do this. They still plan for urban growth for the overall needs of the region. But when it comes to taking that need that Metro plans for, we're going to have DAS, the Office of Economic Analysis, right? We're going to have them take on the responsibility for allocating that need to cities and counties within the metro region, right? So that's important, right? Metro decides how much housing the overall region plans for, and then the state kind of distributes that to individual jurisdictions within the metro region. And then, of course, for cities and for counties as they relate to urban unincorporated lands, their kind of role or responsibility is in implementing Goal 10, housing capacity analyses and housing production strategies. So that's kind of a big thing. You'll notice that I kind of posted that interim methodology that DAS has kind of been working on. That includes, right, an interim methodology for how that allocation works in the metro region. And of course, Metro has a process underway right now where they're determining the overall growth needs for the region. So these are processes that are underway right now. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And then one last slide I'll kind of mention, and this is this idea of kind of broader partnership. This is something to be aware of that Metro has. It's a new responsibility called a housing coordination strategy. And essentially what this is, I mentioned that housing production strategy, where local governments kind of decide the actions they want to take to promote the development of housing. This is that same requirement, but at a regional scale. And it's a requirement that Metro has to produce essentially kind of in tandem with their urban growth report. They produce it, I think their deadline's 1 year after that report. And essentially what they're saying is, hey, Metro regional government, what tools are you bringing to the table to help support local governments in the development of housing in their communities, right? So this is something to be looking out for. Metro has this responsibility. They obviously, need to develop this report, obviously in consultation with local governments, to kind of describe the resources, the regional coordinating tools, all the things that they're going to bring to the table to support the production of housing. So with that, I'm going to pivot to talking about a process update, because there's a few things that are happening right now that, folks can kind of get involved with. And I'll start with our rulemaking process. So I mentioned previously that we're kind of in this rulemaking process for, implementing Goal 10 and really refocusing it towards housing production, affordability, and choice. This is something that is actually underway right now, and we're actually kind of about like halfway through our first deadline. And we've developed kind of a first draft of rules, right? So this is something where, the legislature's given us this direction. We've been engaged in a process with a rulemaking advisory committee, including a lot of the folks kind of on this call too. Clackamas County staff have been super helpful in helping us think through a lot of these issues in this legislative direction, and have kind of led to this first draft that we know is going to be, refined. We're going to get a lot of feedback on it. We're going to change it. Things are going to, be refined as we kind of move forward and hit our statutory deadlines. And that's something that's available for review. And of course, I provide links in the slides for this. And then another thing, right? I again posted the link in the chat, but there's also this methodology, right? That includes how the allocation works in the metro region, how estimating needs works for areas outside of the metro, and kind of has, all the methodological nerdy details that go into, how housing need is going to be planned and distributed throughout the state. Again, this is also kind of like a first draft. The intent is to kind of publish it, take in public comments through August 16th to kind of, hear what some of the big needs of refinements are, and to kind of take those, refine the methodology, and then kind of post a refined version for public testimony later this year. So with that, I think we've actually made it all the way through to the end, and we can kind of stop and kind of go into discussion, talking through questions that folks might have, and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Any commissioners have questions for Sean? You were very efficient.
Excellent. I mean, that's good to hear. I appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, Martha, did you have a question?
I had more of a sort of a follow-up comment, mostly for the commissioners. So if there's commissioner questions, we can take those first. I guess I don't see any hands. I also want to say thank you, Sean. This is a lot, and it's a lot even for those of us on staff who have been involved in this for a while. And I don't think there's an expectation that you all will totally understand all of this. We really just wanted to sort of start the conversation about what's going on around housing and some of the changes that are coming. And I think what's important to you all as we go into the future is that you will, in the next couple of years, be seeing some of the things coming out of this with respect to implementation in Clackamas County. For one, Clackamas County hasn't had to in the past do these housing capacity analyses and housing production strategies for the urban unincorporated area. And that will happen. And that's something that we'll discuss with you and will have to be adopted into the county's comprehensive plan. And there will be a lot of public outreach involved with those kinds of processes. And so as we get through, like right now, there's a lot of work going on to really write the rules. And as we get to the tail end of this and implementation, it's going to be something that you're definitely going to be more involved in with these housing conversations in the future and choices of strategies that the county wants to use to encourage housing of different types and different affordability levels in different areas. So I just sort of wanted to bring that down maybe to a little bit more of the local level. I don't think that unless you're really nerdy like me and want to read through all the methodology stuff and provide comments, there isn't necessarily anything you need to do with this information right now, except sort of think about it and realize that this is going to affect some of our future work. That's it. I don't have questions.
I have to say, this is a lot to take in, along with the new wildfire maps that have just been released, and with the requirements that are out now in planning. So, boy, planning department, you guys are not going to be sleeping much, I don't think. Yes, this is quite a bit to take in, and Sean, I really appreciate you showing up, and Kelly, thank you so much. I'm going to have to also ask, please keep in mind the wetlands that have been, there's been so much effort to protect those. When we're looking for lands to be built on, please consider that.
And if I could add one thing, Chair Murph, is not just wetlands, but historic landslides.
Oh, there
That's historically a problem.
This is something I didn't talk about. We actually have specialists at our agency who focus on these issues. Goal 5 is all about natural resources, including planning for protecting our kind of different natural resources. Wetlands are one of them. And of course, also planning to protect people from natural hazards. That's goal 7. So that includes things like obviously landslides and that type of thing. We don't want to put people or property in harm's way, right? So these are definitely kind of, if we think about the broader statewide land use planning framework, it's really kind of thinking comprehensively about what we want our communities to look like. And I think that's something at DLCD that I definitely want to encourage in this process, is really thinking about that and thinking about that positive vision of like, we want to make sure that we're protecting our natural resources, protecting our environment, and also providing choices for people, meaningful choices in terms of where and how they live, that type of thing. So yeah, no, awesome. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sean, you're good at your job. Well done.
Gary?
I have a
Thank you.
quick comment. I was trying to raise my hand, and I do appreciate you DLCD coming to our commission tonight and talking about these very complicated and also important issues that we're going to be grappling with in the years to come. And my comments earlier, if it came across as being frustrated, is because I am. I've been following some of the work that HPAC has been doing. And the recommendations that HPAC made, and there's so many of them that I can't come up with all of them, but I'll just give you an example of one where they outright recommended that we allow cutting down of 48-inch trees up to 48-inch diameter at breast height can be cut down for no reason. You don't even have to get a permit for making that happen. That's a really, 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 really big tree. It takes a long time. And to say that was actually a compromise, because the committee actually had started out with the 72-inch and it came down to 60. I think actually it's not 48. They went down to 60-inch. I believe a 60-inch is what they ended up coming up with as an outright ability to cut down in the name of building houses. We have got to do better than that. We can't say on one side that we protect our environment and we want to have climate friendly policies to be able to affect climate change and heat island and all of those things, and plant more trees here and everywhere. And then to turn around and say, if you want to build a house, go ahead and cut down all the trees that are on your lot that as big as 48, 60 inches. It's really frustrating when you're trying to navigate through all these different regulations that are coming down that seems to be completely at opposition with each other. So I hands out to you guys, because I know that you have a really, really difficult job to navigate through all these things, but we're relying on you to look at all these things as you come down with suggestions on how many housing units need to be put into each agencies. And I'm sure you're frustrated also. I'm sure you see a lot more than I do. I was just baffled by how agencies were not really engaged with that whole process throughout the year. So that's just a comment, and I do thank you for coming and talking to us today.
Totally understand. And if I can speak to that too, that frustration, I do want to emphasize, the policy that I was talking about here today is really kind of a reaffirmation of the land use planning system, which is intended to be, a way, like a systematized way for communities to plan for the future of what they want their community to look like and the values that they want to prioritize in the development, of course, consistent with state law and state kind of guidelines and parameters. I should mention, I think this is important to mention too, just on the Housing Production Advisory Council process that unfolded. That was something that was led by the governor's office. I do want to emphasize, just because at least, I'm not part of the governor's office, but I did follow the process. I was adjacent to it. And I should mention that part of the statement of intent behind the governor's office was really to have this council with kind of an unfiltered set of recommendations from kind of people in the home building, right? Like the builders, the people who actually produce housing units. And in terms of like those being translated into actual policies, that then has to go through the governor, right? Like they consider these recommendations, right? They'll think about them. They'll think about like, well, these highlight some barriers that we might need to think about, but they're not like legislative proposals, and they won't be until the governor and legislators decide to move forward with them and decide, all right, let's see if we turn any of these into actual policies on the ground. So when it comes to something, for example, that tree proposal, that's actually not state policy. That was a recommendation from a council that was intended to be kind of unfiltered. It has a lot of process to go before it's kind of any kind of state policy. So there is kind of a process that's unfolding there. Obviously, I understand a lot of the recommendations were very unfiltered, right? And so I can totally understand the frustration, but I did want to mention that just in case that wasn't clear, or if there was a thought that like this is now state policy, we have to cut down trees of X numbers of diameter or breast height, that kind of thing.
Anyone else? Again, thank you so much, Sean.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, thank you guys for the time. I really appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, Martha.
So, wow. Sean is a great presenter and he's very articulate. And so I hate to follow that because, yeah. Anyway, we wanted to talk about two other things that were going on right now, and one of them at the regional level and one of them at the county level. And I don't really have a presentation put together. I was just going to talk a little bit about first the Metro Urban Growth Report, or their urban growth boundary assessment. And I was looking for a really good map of the urban growth boundary, and I don't really have one, but I'm going to share this just to give everybody, make sure you have sort of a visual sense of what we're talking about, because I know this is all in my head, but sometimes I tend to forget that things that are in my head are not in other people's heads. So I'm just going to share this really quick. Maybe, yeah. Okay. So like I said, it's not the best map in the world, but this is the Portland metropolitan area urban growth boundary. Everything inside this white area. Don't worry about the purple colors. It really encompasses parts of 3 counties: Washington County, Multnomah County. Clackamas County line is a little hard to see. It's along here. We're sort of this chunk of it. It includes a number of cities like Milwaukee, Gladstone, Happy Valley, Oregon City. This is also part of Wilsonville, is in Clackamas County. And so Metro, the regional government, is in charge, is tasked with assessing and evaluating and making a determination on whether or not to expand the regional urban growth boundary. And it might expand over here in Washington County. It might expand in Clackamas County. And so these are decisions that are made at the regional government level. But of course, it involves a lot of coordination with local government and other stakeholders. And they do a lot of public outreach around this. And so right now, Metro is in the process of doing their sort of mathematical assessments of the urban growth boundary. I put in your packet a very brief write-up that we had done about the process and what's going on. And I also included an executive summary of the draft urban growth report that just came out a couple days before I sent you this packet. The urban growth report is basically the first document they come out with, and it is sort of, it shows the math. It doesn't yet include any recommendations about what to do around the urban growth boundary. Usually the handwriting is on the wall and you can see what's going to happen. I can say this time it's a little bit different and we're not entirely sure what's going to happen. In that summary document, in the urban growth report, there are some timelines, and actually those timelines have changed a little bit. So right now they're accepting public feedback and public comment. The cutoff for that is actually August 22nd. They extended it a little bit because they were asked to. They had originally said August 4th, and it really wasn't enough time. And so what happens after that is Metro's chief operating officer reviews this and issues a recommendation. So based on everything that's in the urban growth report and the analysis, what is the recommendation of the chief operating officer about what to do about the urban growth boundary? Ultimately, that goes through public hearings, and Metro Council decides what to do about the urban growth boundary. And when I say what to do about it, there's options to do nothing, just leave it the way it is. They could expand the urban growth boundary, or they could decide, as they have in the past, to expand somewhere, but then take away from another place. It's the urban growth boundary swap. Metro's current policy, it hasn't always been this way, but Metro's current policy is that they're only going to expand the urban growth boundary if there's a city who asks them to. And in order to ask, the city has to do a lot of pre-planning or concept planning. They have to identify the area, how much buildable lands they have, what types, how they're going to zone it sort of at a high level, about how much capacity there is, how much housing could be built there, jobs, and a sort of a preliminary financial plan of how it's going to be served. And so right now, the only city that has done that and asked for an expansion is the city of Sherwood. And that's part of the discussion in the urban growth report, and on their webpage, they have Sherwood's proposed expansion. I can say that there's a lot of new processes going on this round. It used to be, you know, sort of like this whole goal 10 conversation. It was really a mathematical exercise. It's demand versus supply, and there wasn't a whole lot of nuance. And so as things have progressed and as it's become apparent that simply demand and supply isn't good enough, there needs to be an accounting for the readiness of the land to develop, willingness and readiness for the land to develop. And also because of the ONA, the changes in some of the ONA regulations, now Metro also has to look at historic, you know, undersupply and account for that. And those other categories that we spent some time talking about related to the ONA with vacation and second homes, houselessness, and this historic undersupply, Metro is now having to account for that. So this round's urban growth report is a little bit different, and it contains a lot more numbers, and it's not as linear. I mean, I think at the end of the day, that's a better outcome. But really what it does is it creates sort of a range of options and possibilities. And so as Metro looks at projections into the future for population and employment growth, they look at a range. And as they look at assumptions for future development, you know, they identify the buildable lands and what they're zoned, but there has to be some assumption made of what that development looks like. And that's where they get into this conversation of, well, in mixed use zones, are we going to see residential and commercial development, mostly residential, mostly commercial? In single family zones, how much middle housing development are we expecting to see? And there's no necessarily right answer. We're looking into the future. And so there's a lot of ranges of numbers that are presented in this urban growth report this time, and some assumptions of scenarios for the future. And what this is doing is really giving Metro a lot of room to make choices about what sort of option they think is most likely to look what people's housing choices and all of that are most likely to look like in the future, and see if that fits in with this proposal that Sherwood has made for their urban growth boundary expansion. It is one of the more confusing urban growth boundary reports that I have read, and I like numbers, and I'm still having a bit of a hard time reconciling all the numbers in this report. And so I'm gonna take a deeper dive into it, and see really if there are any potential implications for Clackamas County. I mean, I think the main takeaways from this report at this point are that there are a lot of options and there's a lot of wiggle room. If Metro makes the decision that they think that the city of Sherwood's expansion plan has merit and they have demonstrated their readiness, making certain assumptions in the urban growth report, there may be room to expand without a swap of land, or they decide that no, really, we firmly believe that population growth is really slowing, which is something that we keep hearing. And we think there's enough land inside the urban growth boundary right now. And so we're not going to expand it for Sherwood, or we're going to find some land to swap. Those are all within the realm of possibility based on the numbers that I've seen in the urban growth report. And so that conversation is going to be happening in the next couple of months. I don't think necessarily this is going to directly affect anything that you do or that we do. It's just part of a process that all sort of feeds, sometimes top down from the state to the region to the county. Clackamas County is not planning at this point new urban areas and asking for urban growth boundary expansions, and none of our cities did this round or last round. Actually, maybe last round they did. And so I think that what we're keeping an eye on are just sort of the capacity analyses, the projections, and whether or not we think Metro is going to do this urban growth boundary swap rather than just an expansion, and what implications that would have for our future. And then of particular interest to me, again, because I'm nerdy, are the numbers, and how I'm trying to figure out how they might relate to the ONA projections moving into the future. It's a little unclear in my brain still, but they are closely tied. And so to the extent that Metro's numbers are going to affect what we at Clackamas County are told are our housing targets that we have to meet, then we need to pay close attention to it. But those are all really sort of technical, mathematical things that I'm personally looking at. I don't think that this urban growth report, it's interesting, and it's sort of a new way of looking at the urban growth boundary. I don't think that it is going to really affect the work that we do day to day that much. So that is sort of my spiel about it. I don't know if Karen has anything else to add. She's been working on this a little bit as well. Or if you have any questions, just please understand this is not my analysis or my report. I am involved in a technical advisory committee and have had some conversations and a lot of presentations about this report, but it's not my report. So I can do my best to answer questions.
So I wanted to add a couple things, and then it looks like Commissioner Wilson has a question. So yes, 6 years ago, the city of Wilsonville did do an urban growth boundary expansion for their Frog Pond area. So that's the last one that's happened. Well, that was the last round, and that was the only one in Clackamas County. And again, as Martha said, no requests this time. We did in the interim, I don't remember now, has it actually been 3 years ago that the swap happened? It doesn't feel like that long ago, but normally anyway, there was a mid-cycle amendment of the urban growth boundary, which they did as a swap. where about 500 acres was taken from Clackamas County's urban growth portion of the urban growth boundary, and the city of Tigard got an addition. And so they removed some land outside Oregon City that the city did not, as I recall, object to, and then some area in the Damascus area. So I think that's staff feels there's the potential for that to happen again in the future. We're not saying it's going to by any stretch. It was controversial when it happened the first time, and for that reason, maybe it won't happen again. But the fact that we've got all that area in Damascus that's been in the UGB for 25 years or so and has not urbanized does, give pause to, if you've got areas that are ready to urbanize, that maybe a swap is something that makes sense. And so I think we just have that on our radar. And so you may hear about that. Commissioner Wilson, you had a question?
Well, not a question, it's an opinion. I would think that expansion of the urban growth boundary should have a lot of input on what our industrial base is doing. Are we improving jobs or expanding our industrial capacity within our urban growth boundary in order to support that growth? If we don't do that, then we're going to end up wasting land. So I really think that there should be some statistics or some information within the growth of an urban growth boundary that says, here's what's going to happen with our industry. How are we going to increase jobs? Because without that, you're just going to attract population that's going to be homeless.
So if I could address that, and so you're absolutely right. A big component of the urban growth report is an understanding of what employment is in the region, what employment projections will look like in the future, and what types of land are needed for those employment projections, and then what types of land exist inside the urban growth boundary. It's not only about housing, it's about housing and jobs land. Interestingly, this analysis this time around seems to be finding that there is plenty of industrial land inside the urban growth boundary. And I can tell you that that is the subject of a lot of conversations right now. Part of the city of Sherwood's proposal includes industrial lands. And there is some conversation about, again, not just the math, not just are there vacant industrial lands, but really are they suitable for industrial development and the industries that we either want or we are projecting. Is the industrial land in Sherwood more suitable, either because of size or location? And so those conversations are happening right now because quite frankly, just based on the numbers, it's not showing a need for expansion for industrial land. And I think in the background there are all these conversations, including in Clackamas County, of, well, we have industries that are trying to come and can't find land. So like, how are we reconciling this information?
Yeah, I would really like to see us have some more of the chip development move into our area. I think that would be good jobs. It would expand our economy, and it would also give these folks that need jobs a better opportunity. So, whatever we can do to increase our industrial capacity within Clackamas County is going to help everybody.
For what it's worth, I'm aware that there's a couple parcels within the Sherwood proposal that for environmental reasons aren't suitable for housing, but may be suitable for industrial. And I think that's part of the plan, if I understand it correctly. But and I should say I don't know what I'm talking about, but that's my understanding.
You've studied it more than I have at this point, so.
Tammy, you have your hand up?
Tammy. You're on mute, Tammy.
You're
Tammy.
You'd think by now we'd get that figured out. So one of them is just merely curiosity in reading the packet. What happens when there's a swap? So one is like literally taken out of the boundary? Is it put into reserve, or is it literally become unincorporated again? I'm just curious.
Well, no, that's a very good question. We asked the same question when this discussion was happening because the metro area, I don't think had ever done a UGB swap, even though state law allows for it. And so what happened was the line was moved, and land that was inside the urban growth boundary is now outside the urban growth boundary, and it's not been designated as either an urban or rural reserve.
Oh, not even reserve. Very interesting.
No, because designating it as a reserve involves a different additional process, I
Mhm.
believe. I'm not an attorney, but I
What-
would
what is
guess
the-
that their attorney advised them that they didn't have to designate it, and it's sort of a more difficult, complicated process.
What if that land was in city boundary?
Well, it wasn't.
Okay.
And so as part of the process to identify lands to take out, there were some parameters put on them, and I don't remember them off the top of my head, but one of them was that it was not in a city.
Okay. 'Cause
So
I
they weren't
just
taking it out of
immediately
the
went
city.
To taxes and all of it. I
Yeah.
went crazy. The second thing, and I didn't certainly bring it up with DLCD, but you read all of this, and I do understand that the goal, as numbers are decided and expansions decided and all that kind of stuff. But the weakest part of the entire package is the fact that services have to go along with this. You can't just build and build and build and build, and as we all know, not have parks and schools and roads and all that kind of stuff. And I get that that's supposed to be a part of it. You know, it's proposed and we have to do traffic studies and all that kind of stuff, but that's not reality. I mean, I know Karen Burek's really tired of me being on my soapbox, but you know, we have a huge complex that's nearing completion on Beaver Creek Road. We have one that's completed and one that's about to be started. And there's absolutely zero additional service. Oh, well, no, there was a sewer pipe put in. So there was that. But I'm just frightened about just that ongoing massive development going down Beaver Creek with no services. And I see that more often than, okay, let's develop, let's get these services are in place and planned and make sure that all the people that are already existing in these areas, that their safety and health isn't jeopardized, because that's exactly what we think is going to happen to us in the Beaver Creek area. And so it just is too light on that subject. This entire packet is, in my opinion. And Karen's nodding. She's like, oh God, we're not even at biscuits and we're talking about it.
No, Tammy, that was right on my mind too. That was it. As Martha was explaining this, that was something that definitely came to surface while I was reading this. Was that, what about the service districts? And how do they take any kind of precedence as growth happens? Do we just wait for them to happen after the growth happens? And what risks do we see happening at that time? What I see is more value in a CPO or a hamlet. That this is something that where they should have more of a say so. If we're going to emphasize changes in goal 10 and goal 14 or modifications, we should have a change in goal 1 also that give the CPOs a little bit more word, I would think, on their community.
And we've certainly written letters, testified, things of that nature, but you know, you even get promised stuff and then it doesn't happen. And it's a tough road. I get it. Everything's expensive, but we have a horrible failing intersection that's not going to get fixed. So I don't think there is a solution other than just living with a very dangerous environment. But it's just getting worse and worse. So anyway, I'll get off of it. Sorry.
Carrie.
Well, and I understand that Sean and Kelly were not the author of all the things that are happening, but you know, the reality of it is people that are really removed from the actual development, and that is people in state, are making the rules that our staff are having to implement. And then, you know, service districts and utilities are going to have to manage and deal with. And I get that we need housing and we need to, you know, act quickly about it, but there's this whole notion of gathering unfiltered developer focused suggested counsel, advisory council, whose recommendation just gets attached as an appendix to governor's report to be, you know, provided feedback by various groups. It just doesn't, it didn't come out the way Sean described. And, you know, the people that are managing utilities, transportation, land use, wetland mitigation, you know, those folks were not at the table. There was a lot of these folks were vilified in many ways. You know, building officials were vilified by saying that things take too long for inspections to happen. And couldn't we just find approved plans before they actually even need to submit anything? Why can't we just come up with a, you know, download a plan, set of plans that you can build a house on without any required permitting? And, you know, that sounds really good until you actually have to do it. Then you realize why we have the professionals in the local level that we have, because we're providing protection and services to the people that expect that level of high quality work. So it's troubling, it's scary. I think we all share the objective, but I feel like things are going so fast that there is not a lot of checks and balances that's going to result in ultimate outcome that we all are going to be happy and proud of. So I don't know what the solution is, unfortunately.
So I'm going to jump in here. I see Jennifer smirking too. You are not the only one that has been saying those types of things. And I think that we share your concerns. The state has been hearing those types of concerns from a lot of different jurisdictions and service districts. And, you know, part of the reason that we have tried so hard to sit on some of these technical advisory committees and rulemaking committees, and Karen and I are both on different technical advisory committees for this rulemaking, is because we have these concerns. And I can tell you in those meetings, we're hearing that, and and we're hearing we need money for infrastructure. We need to improve our infrastructure, transportation, sewer, water. We need money for infrastructure. And so the state is listening and providing some, but I think that it's not nearly enough. And I don't know what the right number would be or the right answer, but please understand that you are not the only one that is thinking or saying these things.
And you know, and we talked about state is providing infrastructure fund. How much did they come up with? Something like
it's not a lot.
1.2 billion or something. I don't even know if it was in the billion.
That much.
I thought maybe it was I remember hearing 300 million somewhere. But anyway, Pleasant Valley alone in City of Gresham, just for stormwater infrastructure, we need something like $14 million or some. I mean, it's one project in City of Gresham needs $14 million worth of infrastructure to get going. And you multiply that by how many, you know, areas that are out there. It's crazy. Tom's involved, Tom Peterson, who's got his hand up, and I'll shut up here in a minute, is involved in ASCE's infrastructure report card rating system right now. And, you know, ASCE is an organization that has come up with an estimate of infrastructure needs, and it's in the billions and $1 trillion worth nationwide. And Oregon's not that far behind. So to throw $300 million into infrastructure support is not really supporting the developers in terms of getting land developed. I don't think so. I will be quiet from now on.
Thanks for the introduction. I was actually going to talk about the infrastructure report card. We'll actually be releasing that August 4th, I believe, at the Capitol. I'll be there. I wrote 3 chapters this time instead of 2. But anyway, yeah, it's hopefully it will help. It's one more tool to get in front of lawmakers about the importance of infrastructure and how severely underfunded most infrastructure is and will probably continue to be. So, but yeah, I wrote, just if you're curious, I wrote aviation, ports and harbors, and inland waterway chapters. So you ever see it? Oh, that's me. More to come.
Well, as Martha said, so I don't know if I would have said smirking, but that's probably accurate, smirking. Just because I have these pet peeves that I rant about frequently, and Karen and Martha are normally on the receiving end of those rants, not because they're responsible for what I'm ranting about, but because they'll listen and, humor me a little bit. And I think part of this thing with the housing is, I don't think there's I haven't heard anybody say they think there isn't a housing problem on this screen. Like, I think we all know that there is. But what I worry about is that because there is this, everybody recognizes this need, and then people feel like we need to respond, state politicians, et cetera, want to respond, that what they're doing is the easy stuff. And by the easy stuff, I mean, let's have more agencies, more programs, more reporting, more bureaucracy, more and more and more, which trickles down to all of us who are underfunded, don't have the staff to do it. Give me another report, give me another dashboard, give me another. And as Carrie said, this implication that somehow this is all because the building department can't get a permit out the door, which is just baloney. That is not accurate. It's like,
or it's the fault of zoning.
Or that it's zoning's fault. And it's like, give me a break. We do, cartwheels trying to figure out how to help our customers every day. And yeah, sometimes it's frustrating, and sometimes it's their fault, and sometimes it's our fault, and a lot of times it's just human error. But we really do try to, give good service and prompt and all of that. And so I think the problem is that what's really the issue is affordable housing has to be subsidized. Deeply affordable housing has to be deeply subsidized, and infrastructure costs a ton of money. And none of this stuff does anything about that. So I will often say, don't give me another report, just go fill a pothole, build a sewer pipe, do something with the stormwater. We don't need another reporting requirement, but nobody's listening to me. So you all had to listen to me tonight. Anyway.
I like listening to you, Jennifer.
Oh, well, thanks, Tom. I appreciate that.
So do I.
So we have one more item, I think, right, Martha, on our agenda?
Yes. And I
Yes.
don't know if Karen wants to chime in here, and I'll tap out for a little bit.
Sure,
Or
I'll
if you
just-
want me to just keep going, Karen.
I can say a few things just to give diversity in the voice. But we just talked about some things related to what the state's doing, and then what the region's doing and what Metro's doing. But what is exciting is what we're going to talk about, what we're doing. And so about a year ago, when we were doing the long range planning work program, we talked about a zoning diagnostic report. And so we actually brought that forward. We talked to you all about it, and the board approved putting that on our work program, and it was all contingent on funding. And so the good news is since we talked to you last, we went out and we were able to get funding to be able to do this project. Took a little bit longer than we thought, because we thought we were going to have to actually get 2 different funding sources, but we ended up getting the entire thing funded by Metro, which worked out well. So the focus of this zoning diagnostic report really is in the urban area. That's really has to do with the funding source. And so not only did we go out and get the funding, and then we had to sign IGAs, but right now we have, we're at the point where we have an RFP, a request for proposal, out to work with a consultant to do this project. So all of that is really good news, and it's good news for what we're doing here locally. So there's a lot of not a lot, there's one page of information about the project on the very last page of your packet. But I thought I'd give you just a real high level, this is what we're hoping to achieve out of the zoning diagnostic report. It really started with this concept. Well, first of all, for about the last 10 years, we've been trying to do an audit of our zoning code. We've known that there are just places that we can do better. And we really wanted to be able to look comprehensively at the zoning code. We also knew that we had to look at clear and objective standards around how we implement housing, the development of housing. So we put together a proposal that really focused on, okay, let's look at our zoning code and where there might be subjective housing standards, where there might be zoning code obstacles for employment land development. We're looking to streamline and clarify regulations and hopefully even maybe simplify the development review process. So those are the intended outcomes of this project. And so the overarching goal really is to get a more effective and efficient zoning code. Working with the consultant, we're really going to put together a report. So we're hoping to be able to get ideas from them. There'll be a whole process about actually working with those, doing some feedback and some focus groups with people who actually use the zoning code. We'll be back. We think that our intention is that the project will last about a year to come up with a report. And so once we have the consultant on board, about 6 months after that, about halfway into the project, we'll be doing a planning session with you to be able to hear from the Planning Commission as well. But we'll do also this kind of subset of different types of focus groups to get feedback on how we can actually make the zoning code better. And so, again, there was a really high level timeline at the end. We anticipate doing what we're calling like more of discovery, kind of identifying those issues this fall. We're going to do the review of the ZDO come the winter and the spring, really do the deep dive into the issues, be able to touch base with different focus groups and groups like yourself, and then be able to actually get the report in summer or fall of 2025. So that's what we're looking at. Martha, our friend Martha, is going to be the project manager. So why don't you, if you have other things you'd like to add from that kind of description.
So thank you, Karen. The only thing I really want to add is I feel the same way about more reports as Jennifer. And I know you just heard Karen say we're creating a report, and it's necessary because if you'll notice on one of the bullets under the diagnostic report development, the really most exciting part about it is that we're really hoping we're hoping it's more of an action plan. So it's identifying issues, identifying places that we can streamline our zoning code, that we can streamline our codes, that we can actually make our code more accessible to people online, more understandable generally, maybe even consolidate some of our bazillion zoning districts, just to simplify. And at the end of this report is going to be recommendations and sort of an action plan. So we can then take this and make the changes to our code. And so that's to me the most exciting part about it. This report is a necessary component of it because Jennifer and I and Karen to some extent have a lot of ideas about things that need to change in our zoning code. But I think that the consultant is going to find a lot more and will have some good suggestions maybe on how to make these sort of bigger wholesale changes that we're envisioning out of this. That's it for me, Michael.
Yeah.
Okay. I appreciate what Jennifer said about reports. And here we have another report. And I'm kind of curious as to why we keep having consultants come in I participate on another county advisory board, and we constantly have consultants coming in and giving reports, but somebody doesn't seem responsible for what the results of those reports are and what the actions that's going to be taken after those reports are formulated and presented. And I don't know what we're doing here. We have these experts that we have elected or hired in our community and in our public government system here, that are supposed to know what they're doing. And yet we have consultants coming in to tell us what we should be doing. Now, perhaps we should be looking at our own internal people to tell us where we're doing things wrong. And as a Marine, as an executive in a construction industry, I took responsibility for what my people were doing. I provided reports and recommendations to my senior management, which took action. I don't understand why we're spending all this money for consultants. If you could tell me why, I would appreciate it.
So that's fair. And I was smirking again because I'm thinking to myself that Martha and Karen are both thinking, wow, that's what Jennifer says about consultants, which I often do. Not anything personal. Most consultants are lovely people that I have encountered, but I do tend to also get on my soapbox about that because of feeling like sometimes we get these products that we don't ever use. They sit on a shelf someplace, or, you know, they don't know our code the way we know our code, you know, those kinds of things. So I am sensitive to what you're saying. And I guess I'll respond maybe in a couple different ways. One is to say there is a funding reality that it's hard to get money for us to do projects that pay for staff time. Most of the grants these days seem to be set up where what you get to do is hire a consultant. And so if we want help, it's easier, more feasible to get it that way than it is to somehow get funding from somewhere to hire another planner, or, you know, to get some help in another way. And so that's part of the reason, because we are actually able to then have somebody do some of this work that will be paid for by Metro instead of paid for by the county. So it's just, I guess, a financial reality that we're dealing with. The other thing that I have been kind of saying to myself about this project is that it's possible that we're a little too close to our own code at this point. I mean, I spent, you know, a decade of my career pretty much writing code amendments. I mean, I started the ZDO audit a million years ago, and it's got, you know, we made some progress and then it got derailed. And I do think sometimes that and I don't think Martha's as guilty of it as I am, but it's like you start with what you have and you're trying to sort of nibble at the edges and fix it, instead of what I really want is somebody to step back and they might actually tell us we need to blow the whole thing up and start over. Like, it isn't structured right. It's not, you know, what are you doing? And I'm kind of hoping that we're going to get a little bit of outside the box thinking that could really allow us to make this code work differently. So I'll say those two things. And then I guess I'll say we absolutely have to follow through and be committed to following through so that you know, although the county isn't spending money on this consultant, the public is. The public is still spending money on this consultant. It's not a county funded consultant, but it's still funded by the public. And so we need to respect that and really achieve something from this. I do think, you know, what Martha said, or Karen said, I guess, was it's not just about making the code more efficient. That is important, but when we say streamlining, sometimes that's just a nice way of saying we're going to get rid of all of our rules. And that's not the goal. The goal is not to get rid of all of our rules. The goal is to keep the rules that work, maybe adopt some new ones that work better than the ones we have, and get rid of the ones that aren't serving. Because we have a lot of things that are just creating bureaucracy. We don't know what they mean. They achieve nothing. And, you know, I joke a lot. We need to like pick 10 things and do them well with our zoning code instead of trying to do 1,000 things poorly. And it won't be 10, it'll be more than 10. But it is a matter of really trying to say, what are the things that we can do that are going to make development look and function the way that we want our community to look and function. And I think that's the filter that I hope that we put on this. You know, it kind of comes back to what Carrie was saying about the development that you see that you don't like. I don't think we can avoid all of that because there are mandates, there are things we have to do, but we can certainly be asking the questions about, well, when we see development, we do like, what is it that we like about it? And what should we be doing in our code that fosters that instead of the stuff we don't like? So anyway, that's my positive spin on all of this, Michael. And I think when we come talk to you in 6 months, hopefully we'll have, you know, something to show you that you'll think is of value. And then again, when this project is over, and then we all kind of have to hold each other accountable for making sure that something actually comes.
Jennifer, first off, let me make sure you understand. I'm not being negative on your management.
Oh, no.
I'm not being negative on your management. I'm just trying to understand why, you know, as an executive in a construction industry, I would have folks come in and do an analysis on my projects, okay, after they were completed and while they were in progress, all right? They were not there to determine whether or not I made the right decision or the wrong decision, but how we were making progress on that, because that decision was already made. We were going to take this project from point A to point B, and how was that going along with our plan, all right? Now, what I'm hearing is that you're looking at reports that say, okay, here's what you should be doing. Okay, I would think that, you know, me personally, you've got the intelligence, the knowledge, and the background to determine, okay, this is not working right. So let's get my team together and let's decide how we can improve this. If we can't come up with a resolution, then we get somebody in external that comes in and says, where are we making the wrong decisions here? That's just the way I work. I know you work however you do, but that's the way I work, and I was successful with that. So just sharing that with you, it's not a criticism of the way things are going. It's just some questions about how things are operating.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I don't think I really have anything more to say beyond the previous answer, but I certainly understand your perspective, and I agree that hiring consultants, we need to be careful about not overdoing it because it is expensive and whatnot.
So if I could add, on top of what Jennifer said, I hear what you're saying, and I think that the way that this project is envisioned by me also, it's not just handing work off to a consultant and say, hey, go do this and look at our zoning code. A big part of this is talking with internal staff about things that we know that might not be working well, and it might not even just be planning staff. And so it's definitely going to be an iterative and a coordinated process. It's just that the consultant brings a different perspective than our perspective, because I think Jennifer's right. Sometimes we are a little too close to our zoning code. It's easy also for me to look at and say, well, this needs to change, but then that ripples into 10 or 20 other things, and a different perspective looking at it more wholesale, understanding and listening to staff where we know that there are particular issues, or are listening to things that we want to get out of it or things that we want to see change. I think it can be a really good process to use that extra expertise. But it's not, we're not just handing everything off to them and saying, you go look at this and tell us what we should do. Because that would not sit well with either Jennifer or me, and probably not Karen either.
Tom, you have something? You're on mute.
I'm having trouble with my internet connection coming in and out. So if I get cut off, that's, so I have some of this conversation, I'm only getting pieces of it because it keeps going in and out. My question is, I think it's a great way to address something that you've been trying to do. And so I support the study because we, I guess I'm the only one that's been a part of this 10 years of audits. And so, but I'm also concerned a little bit about your capacity to implement the recommendations given the staffing changes that you have. So it kind of begs the question, would it make sense to see if you could get a similar funding source to help implement the work as well, as opposed to you come up with this really great report and all these great recommendations that you don't have the resources to implement them because you got other things to work on, so nothing really comes of it. That would be my only concern.
And I think, I mean, I'm happy to defer to Karen or Martha on this. We've talked about that, I think, a little bit about the potential for get through this project and potentially find some funding to continue the work if we need to. And it kind of depends. I'm typically not a proponent of having consultants draft code for us because historically it hasn't worked out very well. I think it kind of depends where the report ends up. I mean, if the report really were to say, you should start over. And I'm exaggerating, but if it was like, everything should be formatted differently. You've got way too many zones. You've got way too many uses. You've got you should have this just completely structured differently. Then maybe there would be value to that, to having them actually draft something. I just don't think we know that yet. But there definitely can be value to having consultants assist with outreach. I mean, depending upon the amount of changes we're talking about, we got to tell people we're doing this. And sometimes there can be some help in terms of having that. So yeah, there may be the need to do that. I will say our staffing has stabilized. We're down a little. We did lose one planning position a year or so ago in the budget. But we're fully staffed at the moment, and it feels like maybe we're going to have a little more capacity than we've had over the last, say, 4 or 5 years. But again, now that I've said that, who knows what's going to happen, what next week will bring. But hopefully we'll be able to do a lot of this on our own.
What new housing requirement you're going to have to do?
There's that too. Yeah, the state just keeps giving us gifts of things to spend our time on. Karen, did you want to add something?
I did want to add something, and I think that one of the benefits of having sort of the consolidated action list is that it would allow us to be able to clearly articulate potentially to different funders or different sources to be able to say, this is exactly what we're going to do. And I do know that DLCD will end up having some type of funding, and DLCD is a funding source that does pay for staff time. So there might be opportunities out there, and as well as with other funding sources, if we're able to say, and this is exactly what we're going to do, it will really set things up nicely. So we're always keeping our eyes open for money.
Yeah, I think this is awesome. We've been trying to we've been nitpicking at making changes. This is time to have outside eyes on it. Absolutely outside the box and see what they see. But you guys have the most experience. I mean, you've seen what goes to LUBA. You've seen what you can't do. You're able to fine tune this. I think this is awesome. Please lean on your planning commission. Please lean on your CPOs. Honestly, because they're the ones in the field, and what we see is how we're going to shape our community. So please don't forget we're here. I know you won't. Tammy.
Just quick, stupid question. When you keep saying zoning, are you talking ZDOs or will this also encompass the comp plan?
So it's largely going to be an audit of our ZDO. I think that depending on the extent of the changes we end up making, it will necessarily require some amendments to the comp plan. To take a wholesale look and rewrite our comp plan would be a whole separate project, which someday we might do. It's not that it's not needed also. I think that this audit of, or whatever we're calling it now, not audit of the ZDO, is definitely more necessary right now.
Okay, good. I was just hoping you'd say what you just said, so good. Perfect. I mean, I know if a comp plan change is needed, that's a little bigger deal, but yes, I think a good hard look at the comp plan is also necessary, but a lower priority. Thank you.
Mhm.
Karen, I have one other comment I wanted to make about this. You and your staff do an excellent job. You're probably understaffed and should have a lot more people. And I'm sure you go to conferences and you send, you know, your staff out to various conferences and pick up information. I would hope that you would look at those comments that come back from those conferences where other planning commissions are doing whatever they do, planning departments or whatever they do that work, and would look at those and see how those could be implemented in your department. I did that and it worked. I can tell you it worked. It was good. I always funded that. So please take that as an action item if you haven't already done that.
Anyone else? Louise, you've been pretty quiet.
Yeah, I didn't have a whole lot to say or ask tonight. That's okay, I think, but
Okay.
It's been a lot to process.
yeah.
I imagine everyone will be processing for a while.
I've been sitting here being very, very patient, waiting for Tom 2's news. How much longer do we have to wait? I'm sorry, but I'm not a very patient person.
We still have minutes to approve. Do we want to do that first, or do we want to satisfy Tammy's impatience? Tom, go ahead.
Well, first of all, none of it's all that exciting or anything. And I want to say there's a much longer story here, but I won't bore you with it. I'm moving to Bend a month from tomorrow. And I didn't intend for any of this to happen during my tenure on the Planning Commission, obviously, or I would never have frankly applied. But it has to do with the retirement community and an opportunity that if I don't take now, I won't get later. And so that's why we're doing it now. So it's one of those decisions that's the right one, but it's too soon probably in my life. But the short version of the story is that I am no longer qualified to be a Clackamas County Planning Commissioner 1 month from tomorrow, actually, because I won't live here. And I got to say, since this is my one opportunity, I've worked in the title industry and in land use issues most of my life. And the Clackamas County planning staff is remarkable. And I can say this because I have perspective of other planning staffs in multiple jurisdictions in multiple states. But Jennifer, Martha, Darcy, and the others are really remarkable. And we are very fortunate as citizens of Clackamas County to have them. And I just want to, if you don't recognize that by being just in Clackamas County, you should. These are really talented people, not only at getting their jobs done, but at managing us and getting through these meetings in an efficient way. So I just want to applaud the staff. You guys are amazing. And I've enjoyed working with you guys in the short tenure that it's been. So there you go.
Can we visit you?
Yeah, we have a basement and it has a full bath in it. So, and we're 12 minutes from Mount Bachelor ski area, 12 minutes. So.
Ooh, now
Oh,
you're talking my language. How about a place for my horse?
I've got a new place to hang
My
out.
partner Donna will help you with the horses. I think that's her thing.
Well, I didn't know about this. This is not a surprise. Tom did let Murph and me and Darcy know that this was happening. So there's only one silver lining, which is that we are in the midst of recruitment. So at least we don't have to, go run a special recruitment. And I will give you an update, I guess, since we're sort of on other business now on that. The board is two members of the board are interviewing planning commission candidates on August 1st. And so there are 8 candidates in total, and we now have 4, I believe it's 5 positions to fill. Let me think about this. Kevin's position, Steve Strodel's position, Tom 2's position, and then I guess 5, because Tom 1 has reapplied, and Commissioner Wilson has reapplied. So yeah, we are filling 5 spots. So it's going to be a big turnover. And so at least we do have 8 candidates. I have not actually studied. I will be looking at what they've submitted before the first. I am sitting in on the interviews. I'm not really on the panel per se, but I'm staffing it. So, and then it's the full board that ultimately makes the appointments. So I think it's unlikely that that will happen before your next meeting, which is August 26th, I believe. Is that right, Martha? For the comp plan amendment and zone change. Do I have that correct?
Whatever that Monday is, yeah.
I should have it in front of me, but I don't.
I think it's the 26th.
Okay, so your next meeting is August 26th. We don't have anything scheduled for the first meeting in August. So you're off for that one. And then we have a quasi judicial comp plan amendment and zone change scheduled for the 26th of August. So Tom 2 will be gone at that point, but we should still be fine for a quorum with, we just need 5. So that's coming. And then I would hope then that we'll have appointments by September, and then we'll need to elect officers after we get our full contingent of folks. We're a little delayed in that, but since we've had these openings and things, it kind of makes sense, I think, to wait. And then I think we will, I haven't set a date for it yet, but we'll do another study session sometime this fall. And I think with all the new members, it'll be a good time. I know at some point you asked to have a presentation on code enforcement, and we will do that. Have somebody come from our code enforcement department to just kind of explain the process. I know Tammy's heard it a million times, but for some of you, it'll be new information. There was a request to give you an update on the fee in lieu of program in terms of what projects have been funded with the money and sort of how we decide how to spend it. So Karen is aware of that request. We'll be doing so we'll address that. And then I think we'll do just a little kind of, I don't know, a refresher and mostly just welcome for the new members of kind of how we run our meetings and how this is all supposed to work, and maybe some of the procedural stuff that county council has sometimes shared. I'm not sure, maybe I'll have Caleb come kind of talk about that as well. So we'll look to do another study session sometime in the fall.
Excellent.
That is other business and the schedule all rolled into one.
Tammy.
A question real quick. I had understood that, and the only reason I'm asking is I've been a part of this process several times, and it's my understanding for the first time in I don't know how long, the chair of the planning commission is not going to be involved in interviewing prospective people. And I certainly respect our board of county commissioners, but I've never seen one of their faces in any of our meetings. So I'm not only curious, I'm also highly disappointed in that change. So may I please ask why?
You can ask, but I don't have an answer. I don't know why. All I know is that the change was made and I was told. So there is a new policy that they have adopted related to why, and when I say adopted, I don't think it's something where like it was a formal vote. But there had been a policy for how they were going to set up interviews for certain advisory boards, and it's not just the Planning Commission. There are several that the board interviews. They don't do all. There are so many advisory boards and commissions, but there's a handful of them that the board members are directly involved in interviews. And so it's for all of those that they have, as I understand it anyway, decided that it will just be board members that will interview. So it's 2 board members, and then they take their recommendation back to the full board for the appointment. But I have no background whatsoever on the reason for the change.
Okay.
I did ask Tammy. Reached out to a commissioner and said they would contact me, but never did. So
Tammy, I have some information on that.
Mark Shull, that's why. Forgive me, I got nothing to lose, but that's why.
we actually have a very good line of communication, or had. Yeah, Commissioner Shull and I had been actually talking in other meetings quite a bit. I'd see him in some of the, like the Mount Hood Corridor Wildfire Partnership. He had shown up at one of those meetings, which we were able to engage. Actually, I saw him at a couple of those. Another one was CPOs. I saw him at a couple of those meetings, and yeah, we were actually able to engage and had chat. So I really felt that I could reach out to him and get a statement, but I never did. Never got it. Anyway.
Tammy, I have some information on that. The Planning Commission, I'm on 3 county boards, okay? The Planning Commission is the only one that I've ever interviewed with the Board of County Commissioners. The other 2 commissions that I'm on have not, they've done that internally, okay? So the Planning Commission seems to be a very important commission for the planning, the Board of County Commissioners. So that's the only one that I've ever interviewed with.
Terry, did you have something? I did check comprehensive plan too, and it doesn't say anything about having a planning commissioner sit in on these.
It was always a very, it was courtesy and professional, and that's just really sad. Very disappointing. Oh, well, on to more positive things.
We'll be fine.
Oh, our minutes?
Our minutes, exactly. I didn't find anything in the minutes that need changing. Did anybody else?
No. I'd be happy to make a motion to accept the minutes as written.
Second? Someone?
Second.
Vote? All in favor?
So we need to do, what did we decide? Oh, they all have to be voice votes. I guess that was the deal. So you're good.
Okay.
I will have to abstain. I wasn't at that
We got
meeting.
1 abstain. Yes, looks like a yes.
Right.
Okay, so 1 abstention and everyone else in favor.
Yes,
Motion passes.
motion passes. And we just did a schedule review.
Yep.
Okay.
So if by chance, I think Darcy already checked on this, but if you cannot attend on August 26th, or if something comes up, please let us know as soon as you possibly can. If you haven't already told her, if you have, she has that. But if something comes up, just because we're going to need to make sure we have 5 that night, or we'll need to set it over. So.
Oh, is that a hearing?
Yes. The 26th is the hearing, right?
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize. Okay, yeah, I'd definitely be there.
I just checked and realized I needed, I was able to reschedule my commitment. So I just notified them that so I'll be there.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. Okay.
Yeah, yep. I already have it down. Good, we're good.
Can I give a really quick update and something that you said at the very beginning, Murph, triggered this in my brain.
Okay.
Can you all humor me for a minute or two? I know it's getting late. So typically after we go to hearing with an item with you and then we take it to the Board of County Commissioners, we do a report back sheet. And I don't know if you were expecting that for ZDO 285, which included the rural ADUs and the RVs and all that other stuff. Part of the reason you don't have that is the board has not adopted it yet. And so you might be aware that the board at their hearing approved the whole package, which included the RVs, the piece that you all had not recommended approval of. But then the board has not yet adopted it. They set it for adoption at the beginning of June. There were only 4 commissioners present. The commissioners decided to table the vote until all 5 commissioners could be there. And as far as we know, that is scheduled, maybe we think, to happen on August 1st, but we're not 100% sure. And so as that sort of progresses, we'll let you know what's going on with it.
As of today, it is happening August 1st. And the paperwork has been submitted to council and council has submitted it to the board's office. So I believe it's at least going to be up for discussion on August 1st. So
How about 288?
So that's on the same schedule. The board approved your recommendation with a couple of really minor changes. Staff asked for a change to an amendment, to one of the definitions, just to clean something up that we hadn't caught. And one of the commissioners wanted us to remove the word natural from natural gas, so it would cover in the future like hydrogen or whatever may come along. So with only those 2 changes, they voted to approve it. Again, they haven't done, they've been on recess for a few weeks, so it's also scheduled for August 1st. I will tell you, it's possible but not confirmed that staff is going to talk to the board at their weekly issues, which is public, but it's not a hearing. Not this week, but next week, because we've gotten some additional information regarding the way the condemnation process actually works through the PUC that is different than what staff understood it to be previously. I think it was me. I don't know. I misunderstood it. Although, frankly, I've talked to the person from the PUC and I'm still confused. But the bottom line is, our council thinks that and has found evidence that the PUC actually could approve condemnation before land use approval. And so in that sense, if that's the case, that they did that in like a few years ago for a jurisdiction in Eastern Oregon. And if that's the case, then there's really no guarantee that a utility provider would have to get a conditional use permit in situations where they need to condemn, which was what you all wanted. I mean, I believe that is what I understood you wanted. And so now we're worried that this is not going to achieve what we thought it would achieve and what the board thought it would achieve. So we're going to hopefully get to have that conversation briefly at an issue session. And so I'm just saying, I'm not sure if they'll move forward with adopting what they originally voted on. It's possible they may refine that in some way, just because we're concerned now that it might not achieve what we thought it would. So there'll be more to come on that as well.
Thank you. It was just heartwarming to hear on both of those. So thank you.
Anything else? And
I don't
it's
think so.
8:52 and we are adjourned.
Thanks, everyone. It was a good meeting. Appreciate everybody's participation.
night.
Thank
See
you.
on the 26th.
You guys
You guys
do
are great.
an
Thanks for your
amazing job.
patience with me. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah,
Tom,
thanks.
you've been
Thanks,
awesome.
Tom.
Bye, Dog Do.
See you later.
Take care, Tom.